A lot of people think about fertilizer as plant food, but that's actually pretty far from the truth. I like to think about fertilizer as more like a supplement or a vitamin that you would take once in a while to supplement your regular food. And that doesn't necessarily mean that fertilizers are a bad thing. They're actually good things for most of the time, but it absolutely depends on the context and the situation where you use your fertilizers. In this video, I'm going to share some tips with you on how to properly use fertilizers, how to decide when should you use it, and how to pick out which fertilizer is going to work best for your particular plant. So let me start out by explaining a little bit about what fertilizer is. So like I said earlier, fertilizer is, you can think about it like a vitamin for your plant. It's just a supplement. It's essentially a bundle of minerals and nutrients that you're going to supplement your plant in addition to the nutrients that it's getting in the soil already, and in addition to the carbon, the hydrogen, the oxygen that it gets from water and carbon dioxide. So fertilizers provide those extra minerals, macronutrients, and also micronutrients, such as potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus, that will help your plant to grow larger and faster. So really what fertilizer is intended to do is to help your plant get some essential nutrients to grow and build up more plant tissue. So keeping that in mind, let's talk a little bit about when you would need to use a fertilizer. I would say in most cases, you probably don't need to use fertilizer for your plants. Most plant species will probably do fine without any fertilizer at all. Some plants are actually adapted to nutrient poor conditions, such as carnivorous plants, which actually like to grow in bogs where there's very nutrient poor conditions, and so they actually have to rely on consuming insects and bugs to get their nutrients rather than getting that from the soil. So I just want to throw that out there. Not all plants need fertilizers, but it can be useful in some cases. And the way you can tell it's going to be useful for you, or when it might be appropriate to apply to your plants, is if your plant is going to be growing. What I want to get into your head is that you want to equate fertilizers with growing your plants. You want those two things at the same time if you want to have maximum success with using fertilizer for your plant. Because essentially what fertilizer is, it provides additional nutrients that are intended to help your plant grow. And if your plant isn't growing, those nutrients aren't really going to do much for it, and it might actually cause some harm to your plant. So what you want to look out for is a plant that's in a growing season and that has a lot of potential to grow larger. For most plants, that means that you're going to want to apply fertilizer in their growing season, which is usually between spring and kind of around the summertime. You want to apply the fertilizer around that time frame so that you apply the nutrients right at the moment that your plant needs those nutrients to grow larger. It's kind of like drinking protein powder. You can drink protein powder whenever you want, but for best results, it's probably best to drink that protein powder right after a workout when your muscles are needing that protein to repair itself and recover. So kind of along those lines, fertilizer is best when your plant needs it to grow and build up plant tissue. And you definitely don't want to give your plant any fertilizer if it's in a dormant season, like during the winter months. So during the winter months, there's not a lot of sunlight. Most plants kind of have adapted to that cycle of expecting not so much sunlight in the wintertime. They don't invest any energy into growing further. And so giving it fertilizer during that time is really not going to do it any good, and it might actually cause some harm by causing a nutrient burn. And nutrient burn happens when you give your plants way too many nutrients, way more than it needs, and that causes the plant to actually get damaged. So you might see like some of the leaves turning brown, maybe the tips are turning a little bit brown, maybe the roots start to not absorb water so well. These are the kind of things that you'll see if your plant is experiencing nutrient burn. So with that disclaimer kind of out there, I just want to throw a quick note here. You want to be really careful with using fertilizer. You can definitely overdo it, and that's going to lead to a lot of problems with your plant. You want to make sure that you dilute your fertilizer with enough water. Always read the instructions that come with the fertilizer. I think most of them do come with some instructions to give you a little bit of guidance there. Check those instructions or do your own research depending on what type of fertilizer you get. And make sure you always give it just the amount that it needs and not any more than that. It's always going to be safer to give it a little bit less fertilizer than it is to give it more fertilizer than it needs, because the risk that you have of under-fertilizing versus over-fertilizing is way lower. So always be safe. Try to stay on the conservative side of giving your plants fertilizer, because plants, unlike humans, they don't really have a way to accommodate excess nutrients. So like with people, if you have too many nutrients, that just gets stored in your fat cells. But with plants, they don't really have any mechanisms to accommodate that kind of abundance of nutrients. And so those nutrients just get absorbed and they mess with the plant's chemical balance, and that causes bad things to happen, like your plant starting to turn brown and your plant not being able to perform photosynthesis. So let's talk a little bit about how to choose which fertilizer you want to use. So one thing you want to look for is something called the NPK ratio. And what that stands for is the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium ratio. And depending on what your goals are for your plant, if you want to do something like grow foliage or you want them to grow more stems, you might want to research a little bit into which macronutrient ratio you want to look for to get the results that you're trying to achieve with your plant. And you can also look at the micronutrient amounts, but those are generally going to be not as important as the macronutrients, the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. I'd say most fertilizers probably list that on the bag when you're buying it, but if you don't see it, that's maybe a little warning sign that you might want to stay away from that one and pick one where you absolutely know what you're actually giving your plants. Fertilizers also come in different forms. There's like tablets, there's slow release, there's granular, there's liquid forms. I haven't seen too much of a difference between the different forms in terms of how much effectiveness it has for your plants. So I would say just do your own research. It kind of is up to a matter of personal preference. I think whatever fertilizer you use, as long as you're giving your plant the right nutrients, it's not going to make a huge difference for the outcome of your plant. The only thing I've seen people say is that sometimes they don't like certain types of fertilizers because it's a little bit more difficult to spread it more evenly across your plants. But that's pretty much all I've heard. I kind of think as long as you're deliberate with how you're using your fertilizer, if you put some intention into spreading it out, then I think that won't really be a problem for you. Two goals that I've seen talked about is sometimes people want to get more foliage production. And so what that means is they want to get a little bit more nitrogen ratio in their NPK ratio. And the other target that I've seen thrown out there is that some people want to promote flowering in their plants, or they want their plants to grow fruit. And so maybe they want to get a little bit more potassium in that ratio. So just use that as kind of a guideline to help you kind of think through what type of questions you want to Google, like how much nitrogen content should I have in my fertilizer? How much potassium should I have in my fertilizer if I want to flower my plant? Just having that in your mind kind of in the background will help you come up with these questions to pick out what fertilizer is going to be best for your particular plant. I would say no matter what fertilizer you choose, I would be really careful about how much fertilizer you're applying. I wouldn't apply any more fertilizer than maybe once every 2 or 3 weeks, and that's it. Definitely don't use fertilizer like you're watering your plants. That's definitely going to be way too much, unless it's going to be in like a really diluted amount. So just be really careful, but if you do it right, it can be helpful to get your plants to grow a little bit bigger and faster. So that's pretty much it for this video. If you enjoyed it, if that helped you out, if that got you to learn something about fertilizers, give this video a thumbs up, and I'll see you in the next video. Goodbye.